So the first one, I suppose, is an obvious question in many ways, and let's start with you, Stan, in terms of why is business ethics important to you, and very importantly, important to your organisation?
Okay, thank you. I would say that ethical behaviour is promoted when you reduce silo thinking. Silo thinking is the enemy of ethical behaviour. The kind of top of the food chain in silo thinking are the criminals that we deal with every day, the self-interested people. So if there's anything that can break down silo thinking in Reading and get us to think more widely about social values, it's not just about how you create an ethical culture within your business, it's about how you export that into the community. And I'm not sure that many people think about the impact that they can have on Reading, on the local community, just by thinking differently and carrying out your practice differently. Pausing on the way to your office to buy something in a local shop, or whatever it might be, but just changing your behaviours and thinking outside of your immediate silos to how you can create greater social value. That helps me to build community resilience, to build community cohesion in everything that I do. So that's why ethical behaviour is really important to me.
Okay, and I'll come on to the how question in a minute and how you do it in the team. Yasmina, same question for you then. So business ethics, why is it important to you? Why does it drive you?
Well, there's different ways you can answer that question. Personally, it's something that's really close to my heart. When I first started my very first business, inadvertently I was sort of implementing ethics into everything we did. But from a professional perspective, I think that it's absolutely key to everything that we do and all the decisions we make in business. So from a geographical perspective, we're here in Reading today. I'm a Reading girl, and I think that now's the time for us to be able to rebrand our town and rebrand our region from being something that we inherited inadvertently in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, of being this kind of bit of a concrete city, and then we became the kind of Silicon Valley of the South, and people know us as being a very tech-heavy region, whereas the people that are from Reading are extremely ethical. We love startups, we love alternative businesses, and I think now's the time for us to inject a bit more of an ethical brand into our region and elevate us across the country. So that's why I think events like this are really, really important, and why ethical behaviour is so important to us in this region at the moment.
And you mentioned you had a question for Beverley you'd like to ask.
Oh, I do. If I can jump straight onto that.
You just take over.
Yeah, thank you. It can make up for your blunder earlier. So what I wanted to ask Beverley is, it's so inspiring listening to you. Thank you so much for coming. And I absolutely hope we are near to where Omaha is in 10 years. But my question to you is, how has your initiative impacted on specifically the GDP of Omaha in the last 10 years?
I'm sorry to say I don't have an answer for that, because we haven't measured it, okay? We have measurements about individual companies and the impact of the training, et cetera, that they've done through the Business Ethics Alliance. And companies tell us that they have less attrition of their top performers because of the kind of climates they create within the organizations, that they have fewer customer complaints because people are treated better. It's hard information, factual about the impact of organizations. The whole community is a different story. We just haven't measured it. And so it may be the case that you can help us out here, because you can see a measurement would require a pre and a post. Yeah, so we're 10 years down the line. We don't have the pre. You guys can do that. And so you can start with the measurement now and then make a comparison 10 years down the road. We have anecdotal evidence. So David Brown, who's the chair of, who's the head of our chamber, he's the one that says that companies come to him and they say, what's your tax base in terms of how many taxes you're going to have to pay? how many employees do you have in order to work at our firms when they're thinking about headquartering in Omaha. And now, within the last, I'd say 3 years, people have been asking a third question of the chamber, which is, what's your ethical base here? What's it going to be like doing business here? And his response is, it's going to be good, and here's why. And he can show, the kinds of programs that we have. But that's as far as we've gone with regards to the answer to your question.
Great, so Paul, can you bring in? Would you like to comment on that?
Two things I'd like, two great aspects here. I'm really glad you answered that question like that, because I think GDP is such a average sort of measure to use. It's not the measure of success we should be looking for. The average GDP across Reading could be really high because we have 5 billionaires and 1 million really poor people, and that makes it high. So it's one measure of many, and the answers you gave about, literacy or incarceration and things like that are equal measures of how we define what our city is. So GDP will include what the police spend on the locks of the prison doors. And that's like a negative, not a positive. So what I was going to say was really around whoever we come from today, whatever organisation we work for, that organisation doesn't really exist. The people who work in that organisation exist. And because ethics and ethical is a uniquely human term, no other animal, no other being has ethics, no inanimate object has ethics. The fact that a business or an organisation is just made up of people means that that organisation already has ethics, because that's all it is. It's a collection of people who have ethics. So how do you get the values and the missions and the sort of purpose that each individual feels in their life within your organisation so that they perform the best and you perform the mission that you
how
can
do you
the best?
guys do that?
We do it by having a clear mission, a purpose to why we exist, that started from the very beginning, that is amplified and sort of ingrained within our culture and our environment, so that when we employ somebody, we employ them for their mindset fitting with our values and our ethics. We let them see and reward them on showing how that their contribution to our business and performing their function of their job lights up our mission.
Right. I can see you're passionate about it.
The receptionist and the sales director or the marketing director have exactly the same impact on our mission, and equally important to each other.
And later we're going to hear from Mark, the CEO of Ella's Kitchen, and I'm sure he'll bring that to life a little bit. So thank you for that, Paul. So let's ask the how question then. So let's start with you. So how can you get your teams involved and helping shape the culture of the business you lead? Yeah, Stan, yeah.
We've had the discussion about GDP. I mentioned social value. I think that's a good place to focus when you're thinking about your impact. What are you doing for your community, which includes your employees? And is there any way that you can start to measure what that impact looks like on your surroundings, on your surrounding community? So taking again out of that silo. It's not the same as CSR, although that's part of it. But how are you joining up like this with other communities in Reading? How are you promoting the vision? Can you put any sort of value on the impact of that promotion of that vision? So what are people saying when they come to Reading? Is it because it's an ethical city? So start to build up a picture of the social impact that you're having. In terms of how I do it in the police, it's by balancing the kind of national, the community, and the individual priorities that I have to balance around the way I allocate resources, and then think about how we are engaging with the community. This is one way, but at a much more local level, it's what's the quality of the conversations that are going on in Reading between my staff and the Reading communities, and making sure that that's a high quality interaction and a chance to authenticate the role of the police with the people that we come into contact with. And I measure it, fairly local level, and see what we need to do in order to change that conversation, even if it is having top hats come back into policing. And if you haven't seen them, then look out for them, please.
So Yasmina, same question for you. How could or should the business leaders get their teams involved? What tips have you got? What could we all do differently tomorrow?
So a couple of hats I wear. So from a startup perspective, so I'm involved with the startup community in Reading, and what we do is we encourage businesses to try and think about how they're reporting on their behaviour. So rather than when people start up businesses, the last thing in their mind is when they're going to have to file their annual return. But actually, what happens is once they get into that practice, they realise the only thing they're measuring is how much money they're making or losing. And actually, what we do right from inception is say to them, these are practical ways that you can start measuring the impact that your business is having above and beyond just your profit. And one of the things that we find, and we touched on it earlier, is that these millennials, that typically young people start businesses, they are much more inclined to be receiving that message. So first of all is right from the word go, letting these new businesses understand that there are ways they can practically measure their output, not just how much money they're making. With another hat on, I'm actually a marketing director for a fintech company. And so it's a mid-sized business, and we work in financial services. The table over there touched on construction. Financial services is probably another industry that we would all remark on as being quite difficult to change ethically. And it's absolutely fascinating what's happening in the world of asset management at the moment in terms of ethics, and how they're all seeing that ethical investments, even the biggest asset managers now, are leading with this brand message of we support ethical investment. And CSR is on the edge, but at least they're thinking about it. And what I do in my day job and working with other marketing directors across the city is absolutely instill and collaborate this message of ethical investments and ethical behaviour throughout all of your business. So it's around starting conversations and informing people that they can actually make a difference and make a change.
Okay, great.
Can I quickly piggyback on that? So the startup community in Omaha, Nebraska, what we do is we work with the startups and we help them, going back to your point, create your core values right at the beginning, the list of 3 or 5, and then that creates your purpose that you then drive in all your messaging throughout your organization. And to get the startups to recognize that that's a good thing to think about, as well as the operations, as well as the funding, et cetera. But very quickly, one of the things that we do to continue to drive ethics throughout organizations is we help people practice the use of moral words. It's so simple, but it's incredibly powerful. We forget when we give compliments to people to use moral words. So get on the internet, find a list of 50 of these puppies, and start practicing the use of compassion, of patience, call somebody noble. Their shoulders are going to go back, and they're going to go, "Oh my God, I'm going to follow you until the planet dies." That was a noble thing for you to do. I saw how you interacted with one of our clients. That took courage. Use those words. Practice using those words, because ethics, you have to practice it just like anything else that matters to you, like playing a musical instrument or baking or what have you. Practicing the use of moral words. More and more leaders do that. More followers will do it, and it'll just be infused throughout the culture of the organization.
I love that. Words matter, don't they? And we all know that.
Yeah, and to follow on to that, one thing about one word, and then, but just first to follow on to that, that is a nudge, and I think nudges really work. Yeah. It's little things that make big differences, and you don't realise they're making big differences, and it just sets the culture. But the one word I was thinking about was, what we could all go back to our organisations and talk about is the question why. So ask of ourselves, why does this organisation exist? Why are we here? Why am I working here? Why have I got up early to come here today? Why are my people? Why do they want to work for us? Go and ask them, why do you want to work here? Listen to them. Listening, I think, is a much better practice than talking, because you learn something. And if you set up within your organization as many opportunities to listen to your people or to your customers as often as possible, you will create a better business serving them better, and a more human business, because you'll bring in some of these words that Bev was talking about.
That's a great question, the why question. So Stan, why?
Well, I'm just going to add to some of that, because just on the theme of being practical and the how.
Yes, please.
We hear a lot about what, and I hear tons about what I should do. Everyone's got the opinion, but how to do it is always more difficult. and seeking inspiration of how to do things is key, I think, on that journey. So when somebody's giving you advice, just always ask yourself, well, how am I going to do this thing? Getting people to listen. I had to put all my staff through a course on listening because we don't ever teach it to anyone. We teach interviewing, we teach telling people to do, we teach command, but we don't teach listening. And I had a lovely meeting with Nancy Klein last week, if anyone's ever read Time to Think.
Good name drop, mate.
So, sorry, Klein. Just a couple of references, really. Time to Think by Nancy Klein. Read it, do it, create the thinking environment in your company. You will become more ethical and you will use moral language. So read that book and implement it. The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. In terms of how to get things done, you mentioned a checklist. Have 3, 4 or 5 things that people can refer to as their moral compass. In policing, it's called the National Decision Model, but it's a checklist. So 2 books, I think, I would just recommend you to have on your shelf amongst many. Great.
So we went out to, we've got a couple of minutes left. I suppose I'd just like to go down the panel and ask for any, I haven't really got a question, any further thoughts, any advice for the Reading team? What vision would you want to get involved? Just to go down the panel. So where are you now in all this? Are you delighted? Are you pleased? Are you
Well, I mean, today is a hugely important day, I think, for Reading, and it's so amazing to see so many of us in the room. And I think it's really so important now that we all go back and take action on at least one thing that we've heard today. And I know I certainly will be putting lots of things into action, but if each and every one of us make that pledge to ourselves that we're going to go away from today and actually do something, I think that those ripples will continue, and then we can all come back and collaborate and really make a huge success of this.
Right, Stan, are you on the same page? Are you?
No, definitely. I think keeping this conversation going, looking for ways that we can innovate together to make a difference. I think it's the right place to start, and I look forward to supporting it.
Right, Paul.
So my point would be about community. It's really, really powerful. Networks are where you learn, when you can listen, but it's up to us. We can all go away from here and think that was a great hour, 2 hours, and not meet each other again, not set anything up. We've got some momentum. Momentum is very important, and so kind of over to the Ethical Reading guys to try and help create that momentum, but it's for us. Are we interested enough to make this happen? We should be. Let's do it.
Great. And the final word from the person that's come the longest way, really. So a couple of things, very briefly. Biggest challenge that the teams might be facing, because there'll be some dark times, or not necessarily dark times, and then the one bit of advice that you'd give us all. Biggest challenge, one bit of advice. Sorry, I know you're not prepared for that. But
this is a tough one, isn't it?
In 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds. First, I just like to say technology is wonderful, because we found each other on Skype and the internet, and I just can't wait to see what happens in Reading because of what you're doing here today. Biggest challenge, keeping this front of mind. Yeah, and that involves getting more and more people involved in what we're doing, what you're doing. So I love your point that you have to leave here and do something. There has to be a step here, and I think you do have some action, some steps in mind. So keeping it front of mind is the biggest challenge. I'll just leave it at that.
Great. Massive round of applause, please, for the panel.